The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered arrogance from someone who genuinely believed they were untouchable. 19-year-old Madison Parker sat in the defendant's chair with the kind of smug superiority that could only come from a lifetime of watching her police chief father make every problem disappear with a phone call and a badge. Her designer Gucci handbag sat casually on the table in front of her, the badge holder dangling from the strap like a shield she had carried her entire life. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the armrest as she scrolled through her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that she was sitting in front of America's most feared television judge. What happened in the next 10 minutes would shock not just Madison, not just the courtroom, but the entire law enforcement community across the country. Judge Judy was about to deliver a sentence so unprecedented, so perfectly calibrated to destroy the protective bubble of privilege that had surrounded this young woman her entire life, that it would become the most controversial and most shared courtroom moment in television history. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Madison didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her was so devastatingly precise, so righteously furious, and so perfectly designed to expose an entire system of corruption that it would end her father's career, trigger multiple FBI investigations, and transform this entitled teenager into a cautionary tale that would be taught in law enforcement academies for years to come. When Madison rolled her eyes and told Judge Judy that her daddy would have something to say about this ruling, when she mocked a judge with 35 years of experience by calling her just a TV judge with no real authority, she had no idea that Judge Judy had spent the previous night reviewing body cam footage, financial records, and testimony from 11 different victims who had been silenced by Chief Robert Parker's abuse of power. She had no idea that calling out a police chief's corruption on national television would become the catalyst for systemic reform in over 40 police departments nationwide. Before we show you the exact moment when Madison Parker learned that her last name couldn't protect her anymore, you need to understand who these people really were and what brought them to this explosive confrontation. Because this wasn't just about one broken camera or one entitled teenager. This was about a pattern of corruption that had been building for years, protected by a badge and enabled by a father who thought his position made his family immune to consequences. This was about Sarah Chen, a 23-year-old graduate student working 2 jobs to pay for school, who had her dreams literally smashed on a marble floor by a drunk teenager who laughed and said, "Send the bill to my daddy." This was about a police chief who had created a 2-tier justice system in his county where his family lived above the law while everyone else faced maximum enforcement. And this was about Judge Judy Files, who had built her reputation on one unshakable principle that nobody, absolutely nobody, is above accountability regardless of their last name or their father's position. Hit that like button right now if you believe that no one is above the law, not even a police chief's daughter who thinks her privilege makes her untouchable. Subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about the Parker family's pattern of corruption will absolutely shock you to your core, and trust me, the next 30 minutes will restore your faith that the justice system can still work when someone has the courage to stand up to power and expose the truth. This isn't just another courtroom case. This is a masterclass in how real authority works, and why respecting the law is more important than having connections to people who enforce it. Madison Parker had spent 19 years learning that consequences were things that happened to other people. As the only child of Police Chief Robert Parker and his socialite wife Victoria, she had grown up in a world where her father's badge was a magic wand that made problems disappear. Her earliest memory of understanding her privilege came at age 14 when she crashed her mother's Mercedes into a neighbor's fence while joyriding without a license. The neighbor had called the police. Her father had arrived in his uniform, spoken quietly to the responding officers, and suddenly there was no report, no charges, just a neighbor who accepted a check and never mentioned the incident again. That was the day Madison learned that rules applied to everyone except her, that her last name was worth more than responsibility, and that her father's position meant she could live life without ever facing real consequences for her actions. By the time Madison Parker entered college at 18, she had compiled a record of behavior that would have landed any other teenager in juvenile detention or at minimum serious legal trouble. But Madison wasn't any other teenager. She was the daughter of the most powerful law enforcement official in Riverside County, and that distinction had become her entire identity. Her Instagram profile boasted 75,000 followers who watched her post pictures of designer clothes, luxury vacations, and bottle service at clubs she was too young to legally enter. Her bio read simply, "blessed," with a crown emoji, but what she really meant was untouchable. Her personalized license plate on her white BMW read, "Chefster," in case anyone forgot exactly who she was and what protections that identity afforded her. Every traffic stop ended with officers recognizing the name, making a quick call, and sending her on her way with a friendly warning that was never recorded in any official system. Every complaint filed against her somehow disappeared into a bureaucratic black hole before it could gain any traction. The incidents had started small but escalated systematically as Madison learned the true extent of her immunity. At 16, she had keyed her English teacher's car after receiving a B grade that she felt was unfair. The damage was $2,800. The teacher had filed a police report and planned to press charges until Chief Parker showed up at her home one evening in full uniform to discuss the situation. The teacher accepted a check, transferred to a different school district, and signed a non-disclosure agreement that prevented her from ever speaking about what had happened. At 17, Madison assaulted a mall security guard who had asked her to leave after she was caught shoplifting makeup. The guard filed charges. Chief Parker visited the guard at his home with 2 other officers. The charges were dropped. The guard signed papers. The incident disappeared. Nobody saw the pattern because Chief Parker made sure each victim was isolated, paid off, and intimidated into silence before anyone could connect the dots between separate incidents. The most serious incident came 6 months before the courtroom confrontation, and it should have been the wake-up call that changed everything. Madison had been pulled over at 2 in the morning, driving erratically, clearly intoxicated. The young officer who stopped her was new to the department, 24-year-old Jake Morrison, who had joined the force. Because he genuinely believed in serving his community and upholding the law. When Madison failed every sobriety test, when her blood alcohol content measured .15, when cocaine was found in her vehicle, Morrison followed protocol exactly as he had been trained. He arrested her, he documented everything, and he turned on his body camera to protect himself and ensure a proper chain of evidence. Madison had laughed at him, telling him he had just ended his career by arresting the chief's daughter. 20 minutes later, Chief Parker arrived at the scene in his personal vehicle, still in civilian clothes but carrying his badge and his authority like weapons. The body cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during their conversation, but Morrison had made a backup recording on his personal phone, sensing that something was very wrong with how this was being handled. Within 48 hours, the evidence had disappeared from the evidence locker, the arrest report had been deleted from the system, the charges had been dropped before they were ever officially filed, and Officer Morrison had been called into Chief Parker's office for a private conversation about his future with the department. Morrison was given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He could quietly resign with a neutral letter of recommendation, or he could stay and find his career systematically destroyed through bad assignments, failed performance reviews, and internal investigations into minor infractions that would be suddenly discovered in his record. Morrison resigned, but he kept the backup recording of Madison's arrest as insurance, storing it in 3 different locations because he knew that exposing a police chief's corruption was dangerous but allowing it to continue was worse. He had no platform to share the truth, no authority who would listen to a resigned officer accusing his former boss of corruption, no way to make anyone care about another case of privilege protecting the powerful. Until Judge Judy's producers started investigating Madison Parker's background for what they assumed would be a simple small claims case about a broken camera. Sarah Chen had no idea about any of this history when she accepted the photography job at the Parker family's charity gala. She was a 23-year-old graduate student studying photojournalism, working 2 jobs to pay her tuition, and trying to build a portfolio that would launch her career as a professional photographer. The catering company she worked for part-time had contracted her to photograph the police chief's annual fundraiser for the local children's hospital, a high-profile event that would give her exposure to wealthy clients and important community members. She had saved for 6 months to purchase professional-grade camera equipment, spending $3,800 on a body, lenses, and accessories that represented a serious investment in her future. That camera was her ticket to transitioning from catering work to her dream career. She treated it with the reverence of someone who understood that it represented not just equipment but possibility, opportunity, and years of sacrifice finally paying off in something tangible. The charity gala at the Parker Mansion was everything Sarah Chen had hoped for professionally and everything she could never have imagined as a nightmare. The event was spectacular, with 200 guests including the mayor, city council members, local business owners, and families of police officers from across the county. Sarah moved through the crowd professionally, capturing candid moments, formal portraits, and the kind of high-quality images that would make her portfolio shine. She was 3 hours into the event when Madison Parker stumbled into her field of vision, clearly intoxicated despite being only 19 years old, her designer dress slightly askew and her words slurring as she demanded that Sarah show her the photos that had been taken. Sarah explained politely that the photos belonged to the event organizers and that she would be happy to coordinate with them if Madison wanted copies. That reasonable, professional response was apparently the wrong thing to say to someone who had never been told no in her entire life. Madison's reaction escalated from annoyance to rage in seconds. She began screaming at Sarah in front of dozens of witnesses, calling her incompetent, demanding she delete specific photos immediately, claiming that Sarah had deliberately taken unflattering pictures to make her look bad. Sarah remained calm and professional, repeating that she was hired by the event organizers and that all decisions about the photographs would be made by them, not by individual guests. Other attendees were starting to stare, and Chief Parker moved toward the confrontation with the clear intention of diffusing the situation before his daughter embarrassed him further. But Madison was beyond reasoning, beyond caring about appearances, beyond any semblance of self-control that might have prevented what happened next. She grabbed for Sarah's camera, trying to take it by force so she could delete the photos herself. Sarah instinctively pulled back, protecting her equipment, her livelihood, her investment. That protective movement apparently enraged Madison even further, and what she did next was captured on the phones of at least 7 witnesses who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Madison ripped the camera from Sarah's hands with such force that the strap snapped, and then, making deliberate eye contact with Sarah to ensure she understood this was intentional, she raised the camera above her head and smashed it down onto the marble floor with all her strength. The sound of $3,800 of professional equipment shattering echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. The camera body cracked, the lens shattered, internal components scattered across the expensive flooring like the pieces of Sarah's dreams and her financial stability. Madison looked at the destruction she had caused, looked at Sarah's shocked and devastated face, and then she laughed. Actually laughed. Then she delivered the line that would eventually seal her fate in Judge Judy's courtroom. She said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Send the bill to my daddy," and walked away as if she had just swatted an annoying insect rather than destroyed someone's livelihood in a fit of drunken rage. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the broken equipment that represented 6 months of savings and countless hours of extra work. Several witnesses approached her immediately, offering sympathy, offering to provide statements about what they had seen, expressing genuine shock and disgust at Madison's behavior. 2 off-duty police officers who had attended the gala with their families approached Sarah privately and told her they would support her if she filed a complaint, that they were disgusted by what they had just witnessed, that Madison's behavior was inexcusable regardless of her last name. Sarah gathered the broken pieces of her camera, fighting back tears, and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to file a police report, press charges, and demand accountability even though every instinct told her that fighting the police chief's daughter was a battle she couldn't possibly win. She took down the names and contact information of 7 witnesses, she photographed the destroyed camera from multiple angles, and she left the gala early to go directly to the police station to file her report while everything was fresh and before anyone could convince her that pursuing justice wasn't worth the fight. The police report should have been straightforward. 7 witnesses, clear video footage from phones, undeniable property destruction, and a suspect who had essentially confessed by telling the victim to bill her father. But Sarah walked into a police station controlled by Chief Parker, where every officer knew that their careers depended on staying in the chief's good graces, where the culture had been carefully cultivated over 8 years to understand that Parker family matters were handled differently than regular cases. The desk sergeant who took her initial statement was professional and sympathetic, assuring Sarah that the matter would be investigated thoroughly. The report was assigned a case number. Sarah was told a detective would contact her within 48 hours. She left the station feeling like maybe the system would work, maybe justice would prevail, maybe having witnesses and evidence would be enough. She had no idea that within 24 hours, her police report would disappear from the system as if it had never existed, that the case number she had been given would lead to a file marked lost, that the detective assigned to investigate would be Chief Parker's closest friend and golf partner who had made problems disappear for the Parker family many times before. Sarah Chin spent 3 weeks trying to navigate a system that had been specifically designed to protect the people who had hurt her. She called the police station repeatedly, each time being told that her case was under investigation, that someone would contact her soon, that these things take time. When she finally went to the station in person, demanding to speak with the detective assigned to her case, she was met with bureaucratic runarounds and thinly veiled suggestions that perhaps she should reconsider pursuing charges over what they called a simple accident between two young women who had both been drinking. Sarah explained that she hadn't been drinking at all, that she had been working, that there were 7 witnesses who saw Madison deliberately destroy her camera. The officers shrugged sympathetically but offered nothing concrete. When Sarah hired a lawyer with the last of her savings, the lawyer reviewed her case and delivered devastating news. Fighting a police chief's daughter in his own jurisdiction was nearly impossible. The criminal system had clearly been corrupted, but small claims court offered one slim hope for justice that couldn't be buried by Chief Parker's influence. Judge Judy's courtroom represented Sarah's last chance at accountability and her only path to recovering the money she desperately needed to replace her destroyed equipment. The producers had been immediately interested in the case once they understood the police chief angle, sensing that this was bigger than a typical small claims dispute. What they didn't know, what nobody except Judge Judy and her research team knew, was just how deep the corruption ran and how many victims had been silenced before Sarah found the courage to speak up. Judge Judy had spent 3 days reviewing evidence that her team had uncovered through methods that went far beyond typical small claims preparation. They had tracked down the witnesses from the gala, obtained the phone videos that clearly showed Madison's deliberate destruction of the camera, found Officer Morrison and his backup recording of the DUI arrest, contacted 6 of the previous victims who had been paid off, and built a case that exposed a pattern of corruption that had been protected by a badge for nearly a decade. The courtroom was packed beyond its normal capacity on the day of the hearing. Madison had publicized her appearance on social media, framing it as a ridiculous lawsuit from someone trying to extort her family, promising her 75,000 followers that she was about to teach this TV judge a lesson about respecting authority. Several off-duty police officers who had heard about the case attended in civilian clothes, silently supporting Sarah and hoping someone would finally hold Madison accountable. Local reporters had gotten wind of the police chief's daughter angle and positioned themselves strategically to capture what they expected would be an interesting case. Chief Parker himself sat in the front row in full uniform despite being told it was inappropriate, his presence a clear intimidation tactic designed to remind everyone in that courtroom exactly who held power in Riverside County. Madison strutted in 20 minutes late, forcing Judge Judy to wait, her designer sunglasses pushed up on her head and her phone in her hand as she scrolled through social media completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to face someone who couldn't be intimidated by her last name. Judge Judy began the proceedings with her characteristic directness, asking Sarah to explain what had happened. Sarah's testimony was clear, emotional, and backed by photographs of the destroyed camera, repair estimates from 3 different professionals who all confirmed the equipment was beyond repair, and statements from 7 witnesses who described Madison's deliberate destruction of the property. She explained that she had filed a police report that mysteriously disappeared, that she had been stonewalled by the department, that she had exhausted every other avenue for justice before coming to this courtroom as her last hope. Madison spent the entire testimony rolling her eyes, texting on her phone, whispering to her mother who sat beside her in a fur coat, and generally displaying the kind of contempt that suggested she viewed the entire proceeding as beneath her attention. Judge Judy noticed every gesture, every sign of disrespect, every indication that this young woman had never faced consequences and genuinely believed she never would. When Judge Judy asked Madison for her version of events, Madison didn't even pretend to deny what she had done. She admitted grabbing the camera, admitted smashing it, but characterized it as an accident that happened because Sarah got in her face and refused to cooperate. The 7 witnesses had all testified that Madison deliberately destroyed the camera, but Madison dismissed their accounts with a wave of her hand, suggesting they were all lying or mistaken or trying to attack her family. Judge Judy pressed harder, asking why Madison hadn't simply paid to replace the camera she had broken. Madison's response revealed everything about her worldview and her complete lack of understanding about accountability. She said, with a smirk that the cameras captured perfectly, that it wasn't her problem, that Sarah shouldn't have been in her way, that people needed to learn not to disrespect her. Then she delivered the line that made Judge Judy's expression harden into something that regular viewers recognized as the calm before complete annihilation. Madison looked directly at the camera and said, "Do you know who my father is? We don't have to pay for anything if we don't want to," as if her last name was a get-out-of-jail-free card that worked everywhere including Judge Judy's courtroom. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair with that slight smile. That experienced viewers knew meant someone was about to be systematically destroyed. She asked Madison to clarify her statement about not having to pay for anything, giving her one opportunity to recognize the magnitude of what she had just admitted on national television. Madison doubled down with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences, explaining that her father was Police Chief Robert Parker, that he had real authority unlike TV judges, and that he handled problems for their family so they didn't have to deal with annoying situations like this lawsuit. The courtroom went absolutely silent as Judge Judy stood up slowly, something she rarely did during proceedings, and the symbolism of that action was not lost on anyone present. She turned first to Chief Parker, sitting in his uniform in the front row, and ordered him to leave her courtroom immediately. Chief Parker started to argue, to assert his right to support his daughter, but Judge Judy cut him off with surgical precision. She explained that he was in uniform in a case involving his daughter after making evidence disappear, that his presence was witness intimidation, and that he would leave immediately or be held in contempt. The bailiff moved toward him, and Chief Parker realized that cameras were recording everything, that resisting would only make things worse, and that for the first time in his career he was facing someone who wasn't afraid of his badge. After Chief Parker left the courtroom, his face red with barely controlled rage, Judge Judy turned her attention to Madison and opened the folder that would destroy the protective bubble of privilege that had surrounded this teenager her entire life. She began reading methodically through 11 previous incidents where Madison had destroyed property, assaulted people, or broken laws without facing any consequences because her father made problems disappear. She described the keyed car, the assaulted security guard, the DUI arrest with body cam footage that had been buried, the cocaine possession that vanished from evidence, the pattern of payoffs totaling over $23,000 to victims who had been intimidated into silence. Madison's smirk disappeared as Judge Judy presented financial records showing the payments, text messages where Madison bragged to friends about being immune to consequences, and testimony from Officer Morrison about being forced to resign after properly arresting the chief's daughter. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely devastating to any pretense that Madison was just a normal teenager who had made a mistake. Judge Judy delivered her ruling with the weight of someone who had waited her entire career for a case that would allow her to make this kind of statement about privilege and accountability. Madison would pay Sarah Chin $3,800 for the destroyed camera, $5,000 in punitive damages for the deliberate nature of the destruction, and $2,500 to cover Sarah's legal fees and lost wages. The total judgment of $11,300 made Madison gasp, but Judge Judy wasn't finished. She announced that she was referring the case to the State Attorney General's office, the FBI Public Corruption Unit, and State Police Internal Affairs, bypassing the local district attorney who was friends with Chief Parker. She listed the potential criminal charges that the evidence supported, including obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Then came the sentence that shocked everyone in the courtroom and would become the most controversial part of the ruling. Judge Judy ordered Madison to complete 200 hours of community service working specifically with crime victims advocacy groups, to write formal apologies to all 11 victims her father had paid off, to attend mandatory counseling for anger management and entitlement issues, to submit to drug testing for 1 year, and to complete an ethics course on abuse of power. The most shocking requirement was the social media component. Judge Judy ordered Madison to film and post a public apology video to her Instagram account with 75,000 followers, explaining in detail what she had done and why it was wrong, acknowledging her privilege and her father's abuse of his position to protect her from consequences. The video had to remain posted for 1 year, pinned to the top of her profile, and could not be deleted or hidden. Judge Judy explained that Madison wanted to be an influencer, so now she would influence people by showing them what accountability looked like. Madison broke down completely, crying that this would ruin her life, that her father would fix this, that Judge Judy couldn't do this to her. Judge Judy's response became the most shared quote from the entire episode. She said that Madison had ruined 11 other people's lives without a second thought, that her father had already ruined her by teaching her that privilege meant immunity, and that this was what facing consequences looked like for someone who had spent 19 years believing she was above the law. The gavel came down with finality, the case was dismissed, and Madison was escorted from the courtroom sobbing while the audience erupted in applause. The aftermath was swift and absolutely devastating for the Parker family. The episode went viral within hours, reaching 95 million views in the first 48 hours as people shared the clip of Madison saying her family didn't have to pay for anything and Judge Judy's systematic destruction of that entitled worldview. The FBI opened investigations into Chief Parker within 24 hours of the episode airing. 7 officers came forward with testimony about corruption and intimidation. Chief Parker was placed on administrative leave, his home and office were raided, and criminal charges were filed within 6 months. He was eventually convicted on 6 counts of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, losing his pension and his reputation in the process. Madison completed all her court-ordered requirements, and the 200 hours working with crime victims created a genuine transformation as she heard stories from people hurt by privileged defendants who had escaped justice. Her apology video received 12 million views and became a teaching tool in criminal justice courses nationwide. Sarah Chin used her judgment money to buy better equipment than before, and her food photography business flourished after her story inspired others to stand up to powerful people who abuse their positions. The case became a catalyst for police accountability reforms in over 40 departments and proved that sometimes one person's courage to demand justice can expose corruption and create systemic change that protects entire communities from abuse of power.